My name is Kelsey Manning, I'm 41, and the last time my family saw me, I was supposedly washing out of the police academy with a broken ankle and shattered dreams. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. My brother's voice was shaking through the phone, words tumbling over each other in panic. "Kelsey, you need to get to St. Mary's Hospital. It's Dad. Heart attack. They don't think he's going to make it." I was already reaching for my go bag before he finished speaking. 12 years of training had taught me to move fast when lives hung in the balance. But as I grabbed my badge and weapon from the nightstand, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same one I'd carried every time I thought about going home. The last time I'd seen my family was at my cousin Rachel's wedding 3 years ago. I'd flown in quietly, sat in the back during the ceremony, and left before the reception. Before anyone could corner me with their pitying looks and well-meaning advice about getting my life together. Before my mother could introduce me to another family friend as my daughter who's still figuring things out. The flight from Quantico to Denver felt endless. I stared out the window at the darkness below, remembering the last real conversation I'd had with my father. I was 29, fresh out of my second surgery, watching him pace around my tiny apartment like a caged animal. "This is it, Kelsey," he'd said, gesturing at my crutches, my stack of unpaid bills, the rejection letter from the Denver Police Department sitting on my coffee table. "This is what happens when you chase fantasies instead of facing reality. Your sister Emma has a real career, a real life. She's making something of herself." Emma. My younger sister who'd never failed at anything, never stumbled, never had to rebuild herself from the ground up. The golden child who'd graduated summa cum laude from law school while I was learning to walk again, who'd married her college sweetheart in a wedding that looked like it belonged in a magazine while I was still sleeping on a friend's couch. The thing is, my family never knew what happened after that broken ankle. They never knew about the federal recruiter who approached me 6 months later, intrigued by my military background and law enforcement training. They never knew about the 18 months at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, the psychological evaluations, the background checks that went back to my kindergarten teachers. They never knew that when I finally graduated, I didn't become just another federal agent. I became a deputy U.S. Marshal specializing in high-risk fugitive apprehension. The kind of marshal who gets called when other law enforcement agencies hit a wall. The kind who tracks down the untouchable, the dangerous, the ones who think they're too smart or too connected to face justice. For 12 years, I'd lived in the shadows between their world and mine. I had sent birthday cards with no return address, made excuses for missing holidays, let them believe their version of my story while I built a different life entirely, one where my broken ankle had taught me to be more careful, more strategic, more patient than any of them could imagine. But as the plane descended into Denver, I realized the performance was about to end. My father was dying, and I couldn't hide behind careful distance anymore. The ICU waiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. I spotted my family clustered around a row of plastic chairs, my mother clutching tissues, Emma pacing in her expensive heels, my brother Nathan staring at his phone like it held answers. They looked older, worn down by worry and the harsh fluorescent lighting. Emma saw me first. Her perfectly styled blonde hair whipped around as she turned, and for a moment, her composed mask slipped. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Kelsey? Oh my God, you actually came." She rushed over, and I caught the subtle emphasis on, actually, as if showing up for my father's potential last moments was somehow unexpected of me. My mother looked up from her tissues, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp as ever. "Sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here. Though I don't know how you managed to get time off from, what is it you're doing now, that security job in Virginia?" I told them I worked in security. It wasn't technically a lie. Protecting federal witnesses and apprehending dangerous fugitives definitely qualified as security work. But the way she said it, like it was barely a step above unemployment, made my jaw clench. "I managed," I said simply. Nathan hugged me briefly, then stepped back with that same careful distance he'd maintained since I'd failed at police work. "Dad's stable for now," he said, but it was close, really close. We spent the next 6 hours in that waiting room, taking turns visiting Dad in his ICU bed. He was unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical persistence. But the doctors were cautiously optimistic. He'd stabilized. He might wake up soon. It was during one of those long stretches of waiting that my family really started talking, really started revealing who they'd become in the years I'd been away. "I can't believe how fast everything happened," Emma was saying, checking her phone for what seemed like the 100th time. "Thank God I was already in the city for the Morrison trial. You remember the Morrison case, right, Mom? The pharmaceutical fraud thing? I'm lead counsel." My mother beamed with pride. "Emma's been working on it for 2 years. It's going to be a huge victory. The partners are already talking about making her the youngest senior associate in the firm's history." "Assuming we win," Emma said, but her false modesty was transparent. She was glowing with the attention. Nathan jumped in with his own updates. His consulting firm had just landed their biggest client. His wife was pregnant with their second child. His house in the suburbs had just been featured in some local lifestyle magazine. I listened to them build their pyramid of achievements, each success carefully stacked and displayed. And then, inevitably, the conversation turned to me. "So Kelsey," Emma said with that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, the one that sounded like concern but felt like a scalpel, "how are things really going? Mom mentioned you're still in Virginia?" "Still there," I confirmed. "And the security work? Is that fulfilling for you?" The way she said, fulfilling, made it clear she thought my job was anything but. I could see the pity in her eyes, the same look I'd been getting from my family for over a decade. Poor Kelsey, who'd never quite figured it out, who'd limped away from her dreams and settled for whatever she could get. "It has its moments," I said. My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on that hectoring tone I remembered from childhood. "Sweetheart, I know you value your independence, but have you thought about coming home? I mean, really coming home? Emma knows people at several firms in Denver. You have experience with law enforcement. Even if it didn't work out the first time, I'm sure something could be arranged." Something could be arranged. Like I was a charity case who needed my successful little sister to pull strings for me. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'm exactly where I need to be." Emma exchanged a look with Nathan, one of those sibling communications that said everything without words. Then she leaned back in her chair, studying me with the analytical gaze she probably used on hostile witnesses. "Kelsey, I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but when was the last time you really examined your life? I mean, objectively? You're 41, you're working a job that, well, let's be honest, it's not a career. You don't have a husband, kids, a real home. Don't you want more?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Don't you want more? As if everything I'd built, everything I'd achieved, everything I'd sacrificed was somehow less than what she considered a real life? I was quiet for a long moment, watching her expectant face. She thought she was being helpful. They all did. In their minds, this was an intervention disguised as concern, a chance to save their lost sister from her own poor choices. "I want Dad to be okay," I said finally. That seemed to satisfy them, at least temporarily. But I could feel the weight of their judgment, their pity, their absolute certainty that they understood my life better than I did. The next morning, Dad woke up. I was alone in his room when it happened, having volunteered to take the early shift while the others got some real sleep. His eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused at first, then finding mine. "Kelsey?" His voice was rough from the ventilator they'd removed a few hours earlier. "I'm here, Dad." He tried to sit up, and I gently pressed him back against the pillows. "Easy. You scared us pretty good." For a few minutes, we just looked at each other. He seemed to be cataloging the years that had passed since we'd really spent time together. The lines around my eyes, the way I carried myself differently now. The quiet confidence that came from facing down armed fugitives and walking away. "You look good, sweetheart," he said finally. "Different. Stronger." "I am stronger." He nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually." "Dad?" "No, let me say this while I can." He reached for my hand with fingers that still trembled slightly. "I spent so many years comparing you to Emma, to what I thought success should look like. I never asked what success looked like to you." I squeezed his hand. "You don't need to." Yes, I do. You're my daughter. I should have believed in you. It was a conversation 12 years in the making, and I felt something tight in my chest finally start to loosen. But before we could go deeper, the rest of the family arrived, bearing coffee and anxious energy. The next few hours were a blur of medical updates, insurance conversations, and discharge planning. Dad was going to be fine, but he'd need time to recover. Lifestyle changes. Monitoring. The whole family mobilized around his care with military precision that would have impressed my tactical unit. It was Emma who brought up the elephant in the room. "We need to talk about practical things," she announced, settling into her take-charge mode. "Dad's gonna need help for the next few months. Nathan and I can handle most of it, but it would be easier if we had more family support." She looked at me meaningfully. "Kelsey, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider moving back to Denver, at least temporarily? You could help with Dad's care, and honestly, it might be a good opportunity for you to make a fresh start. I could introduce you to some people, help you find something more stable than security work." There it was again, the assumption that my life needed fixing, that what I'd built for myself in Virginia was somehow inadequate, temporary, a placeholder, until I could figure out how to have a real career like theirs. My mother jumped in immediately. "Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Kelsey, you could stay in your old room while you get back on your feet. And Emma's right. There are so many opportunities here, much better than whatever you're doing out east." Nathan nodded enthusiastically. "It makes sense. Family should stick together, especially now." I looked around the room at their expectant faces. They'd already decided what was best for me. Again, they were generous with their offers, convinced of their rightness, absolutely certain that coming home would save me from the small, limited life they imagined I was living. My phone buzzed. A text message. Without thinking, I glanced at it. Then I went very still. "Agent Manning, we have a situation. Priority 1 fugitive, spotted in Denver metro area. Armed and extremely dangerous. Need you on scene ASAP. Black SUVs en route to St. Mary's Hospital for pickup. ETA 12 minutes. The message was from Deputy Chief Sarah Chen, my direct supervisor at the U.S. Marshal Service, the woman who'd personally recruited me for the elite Special Operations Group. The woman who trusted me to track down the most dangerous fugitives in the country. I stared at the phone for a moment, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes operations. Then I looked up at my family, who were still waiting for my answer about moving home and accepting their rescue. "I need to make a phone call," I said, standing up. "Excuse me for a minute." I stepped out into the hallway and called Chen back. "Manning here." "Kelsey, thank God. We've got Marcus Webb. You remember Webb?" I remembered. Marcus Webb was a cop killer who'd been on the run for 8 months, former military, expert marksman, suspected in the deaths of 3 law enforcement officers across 2 states. He was smart, dangerous, and had managed to stay one step ahead of every agency that had hunted him. "Where?" I asked. "Denver International Airport. He's traveling under the identity he helped us track last month. TSA flagged him 20 minutes ago, but he made them before they could move. He's somewhere in the terminal, armed, and we have reason to believe he's planning something big." My mind was already shifting into operational mode. Airport layout, civilian casualties, multiple exit points, federal jurisdiction. What's the tactical situation? Local PD is maintaining perimeter, but they're not engaging. FBI's sending a team, but you know Webb's file better than anyone. You've been tracking him for 6 months. We need you to lead the apprehension. I glanced back through the window at my family, who were still discussing my hypothetical future in Denver, still making plans for my imaginary fresh start. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. When I walked back into the room, Emma was in full planning mode, making lists on her phone. "And we could look at some apartments this weekend. Nothing fancy, just something affordable while you transition." "I have to go," I interrupted. They all looked at me with varying degrees of confusion. "Go where?" my mother asked. "Work," Emma laughed. "Kelsey, you're in Denver. What work could you possibly have here?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized, the direct line to the Denver FBI field office. "Manning." Agent Manning, this is Special Agent Rodriguez with Denver FBI. Deputy Chief Chen said you're taking point on the web situation. We're coordinating with local authorities and need you at our command center ASAP. I could feel my family staring at me. The word agent seemed to have penetrated their awareness. Understood, I'm en route. I hung up and looked at their confused faces. Emma was frowning like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Nathan's mouth was slightly open. My mother looked completely lost. Agent? Emma said slowly. Did he say Agent Manning? Before I could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway outside. Through the window, I could see two men in dark suits approaching the nurses' station. Federal agents, unmistakably. Professional bearing, conservative haircuts, the subtle bulk of concealed weapons. One of them spoke to the nurse, who pointed toward Dad's room. Ma'am, the older agent said as he stepped into the doorway. Deputy U.S. Marshal Manning, I'm Agent Sullivan with the FBI Denver Field Office. We have your tactical gear and sidearm. The operation is ready to proceed. The room went completely silent. Deputy U.S. Marshal Manning. I watched the words hit my family like physical blows. Emma's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been panic. Nathan's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, splashing across his expensive pants. My mother just stared, her mouth working soundlessly. Copy that, I said to Agent Sullivan. 5 minutes. He nodded and withdrew, but I could hear him speaking into his radio in the hallway. Marshal Manning confirmed on scene. Operation proceeds as planned. I turned back to my family, who looked like they'd been hit by lightning. 12 years, I said quietly. 12 years I've been a deputy U.S. Marshal. 6 of those with the Special Operations Group, tracking down the kind of fugitives other agencies can't catch. Emma found her voice first, but it came out as barely a whisper. That's impossible. You washed out of the police academy. You were a security guard. I was recruited by the Marshal's Service 18 months after my injury. They were interested in my military background and my ability to adapt under pressure. Turns out, breaking my ankle and having to rebuild my entire life plan was exactly the kind of resilience they were looking for. I moved toward the window, checking the street below. More federal vehicles were arriving. Black SUVs with government plates. A mobile command unit. The kind of response reserved for the most dangerous operations. The security job was my cover story. I continued, not looking at them. It's easier for everyone if my family thinks I have a boring, safe job. Most people in my position do the same thing. Nathan made a strangled sound. But you said... You never told us. I tried to tell you, many times. But every conversation became about how I needed to get my life together, how I should be more like Emma, how I was wasting my potential. I finally turned to face them, so I stopped trying. My father, who'd been silent through all of this, spoke up from his hospital bed. His voice was stronger now, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Pride. A deputy U.S. Marshal, he said. My daughter is a deputy U.S. Marshal. Emma was shaking her head like she could make this new reality disappear through sheer denial. This doesn't make sense. Why would you hide this from us? We're your family. Because every time I came home, you treated me like a failure who needed rescuing. Because you assumed my life was small and meaningless. Because it was easier to let you think I was struggling than to defend my choices every single time we talked. I moved toward the door, where Agent Sullivan was waiting with my gear bag. And, honestly, because what I do is dangerous enough without worrying about my family being targets. That stopped Emma cold. For the first time, she seemed to understand that my secrecy hadn't been about shame. It had been about protection. About keeping them safe from the kind of people I spent my days hunting. The fugitive I'm about to apprehend has killed 3 law enforcement officers, I said, strapping on my tactical vest. He's armed, desperate, and he's somewhere in Denver International Airport right now, so you'll have to excuse me if I can't continue this family meeting. I checked my weapon, ran through my mental checklist, and felt the familiar calm that came before high-stakes operations. This was who I'd become in the years they'd lost track of me. Someone who walked toward danger instead of away from it. Someone who protected others, even when those others had never believed in her. My mother finally found her voice. "Kelsey, wait, I don't understand. All these years You thought I was a disappointment," I finished for her. "You thought I was wasting my life. You thought I needed Emma to find me a real job." Emma flinched like I'd slapped her. "But here's the thing," I continued, moving toward the door. "I've been living my real life this entire time. I just got tired of defending it to people who'd already decided I was worth less than they were." Agent Sullivan handed me my earpiece and tactical radio. "Ma'am, we need to move. Webb's on the move inside the terminal." I nodded, then looked back at my family one last time. They were staring at me like I was a stranger, and in many ways, I suppose I was. I'd become someone they'd never bothered to know. "Dad's gonna be fine," I said. "He's got excellent doctors and plenty of family support. I need to go do my job." "Your job," Emma repeated faintly. "My job. The one where I track down armed killers and make sure they can't hurt anyone else. The job where I've received 3 federal commendations and been personally recruited for the most elite fugitive apprehension unit in the country. The job where I save lives." I paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Emma, that security work you were so worried about? Last year I made $127,000, plus federal benefits. Not quite your law firm's salary, but I sleep pretty well at night knowing I've never had to defend pharmaceutical companies that poison people." The last thing I saw was Emma's face going white as I walked out of the room. The operation at the airport took 4 hours. Marcus Webb was exactly as dangerous as his file suggested, and apprehending him required everything I'd learned in 12 years of federal service. Tactical planning, psychological profiling, split-second decision-making, and the kind of steady nerve that comes from knowing lives depend on your performance. When we finally had him in custody, Agent Rodriguez shook my hand. "Outstanding work, Marshal Manning. Webb's been a ghost for 8 months, and you put him down clean. No shots fired, no civilian casualties." "Team effort," I said, but I felt the satisfaction that came with a job done right, another dangerous fugitive off the streets, another family somewhere that wouldn't have to bury a law enforcement officer. My phone had been buzzing throughout the operation, but I hadn't been able to check it. Now, as we processed the scene and handed Webb over to federal detention, I finally looked at my messages. 17 missed calls from my family. 23 text messages. The text started confused and escalated to frantic. "Kelsey, call me back. We need to talk. Emma." "Sweetheart, please call. We're worried. Mom." "Holy shit, you're actually a federal agent? Nathan. The news is showing the airport thing. Is that you?" "Emma. They're saying it was a U.S. Marshals operation led by a female agent. Nathan. Kelsey, call home right now, Mom." The final text was from my father, sent 20 minutes earlier. "I'm proud of you. Come home when you can." I drove back to the hospital in my rental car, still wearing my tactical gear. The news vans were already setting up outside the federal building, and I'd caught a glimpse of the headlines scrolling across the lobby TV. "Dangerous cop killer apprehended at DIA. Federal manhunt ends in Denver. U.S. Marshals capture armed fugitive." None of the reports mentioned my name. Federal agents rarely get individual credit for operations, but I knew my family would be watching every news story, trying to piece together what they'd never understood about my life. When I walked back into Dad's hospital room, the atmosphere was completely different. Emma was sitting in the corner, very quiet, staring at her hands. Nathan was pacing by the window, occasionally glancing at me like I might disappear. My mother was clutching my father's hand, her eyes red from crying. "How did it go?" Dad asked immediately. "Clean apprehension, no one hurt, he's in federal custody." Dad nodded approvingly. "Good work." It struck me then that he was the only one who'd immediately understood what my job actually meant, what it required, what it cost. Emma cleared her throat. "Kelsey, I owe you an apology, several apologies." I pulled off my tactical vest and sat down. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." She looked up at me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been horrible to you. For years. I made assumptions about your life, your choices, your worth. I treated you like you were a failure when you were actually out there doing something incredible." She took a shaky breath. "I'm a lawyer. I defend corporate clients for money. Important work maybe, but not what you do. You save lives, you catch killers, you put yourself in danger to protect people like us. Emma. No, let me finish. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I spent 12 years thinking I was the successful sister. I was so proud of my achievements, so sure I'd figured out life better than you had. And all this time, you were doing work that actually mattered, work that required more courage and skill and dedication than anything I've ever done. My mother spoke up from beside Dad's bed. Sweetheart, I don't know how to apologize for the way we've treated you. All those things we said about your job, your life, we were so wrong. You weren't wrong to want me to be safe and happy, I said. You just didn't understand that I already was. Nathan stopped pacing and turned to face me. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you tell us? Really? I considered the question for a moment, trying to find the right words. Because every family gathering became an intervention, every phone call turned into career counseling. You'd all decided I was struggling, and nothing I said seemed to change that. It was easier to let you think I had a boring job than to constantly defend my choices. I looked around the room at their faces, really looked at them for the first time in years. And because the work I do puts targets on the backs of people I love, Marcus Webb, the man I arrested today, he's killed before. He's part of a network of people who don't hesitate to go after law enforcement families. The less you knew about my real job, the safer you were. That landed heavily. I could see them processing the reality that my secrecy had been about protecting them, not hiding from them. But there's something else, I added. Something harder to explain. They waited. I needed to prove to myself that I could build something meaningful without your approval, that my worth wasn't dependent on your understanding or validation. For 12 years, I've been doing work that matters, saving lives, making a difference, and I did it without needing you to believe in me first. Emma made a small sound, almost like a sob. God, Kelsey, what kind of sister was I? You were the sister who had a different definition of success than I did, that's all. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite that simple. They hadn't just had different definitions. They'd assumed theirs was the only one that mattered. They'd dismissed my choices, without ever asking what those choices meant to me. My father squeezed my hand. I want to hear about your work, real stories, what it's like to do what you do. So I told them. Not everything. There were operational secrets I couldn't share, but enough to help them understand. I told them about the training, the partnerships with other agencies, the satisfaction of bringing closure to victims, families. I told them about the fugitive I'd tracked for 14 months before finally apprehending him in a warehouse in Baltimore. I told them about the federal task force I'd been selected to lead, the commendation I'd received from the director of the Marshal's Service. I told them about the life I'd built while they were waiting for me to build a different one. As I talked, I watched their faces change. The pity disappeared, replaced by something I'd forgotten they were capable of. Respect. Genuine admiration for what I'd accomplished, not just professionally but personally. The strength it had taken to rebuild after my injury. The courage required to face down armed killers. The dedication needed to excel in a field dominated by men. When visiting hours ended, they all hugged me differently than they had in years. Emma held on the longest. I'm sorry, she whispered, for all of it, for not seeing who you really were. I'm sorry too, I said, for not trusting you enough to share it. That night, I sat in my hotel room and called Deputy Chief Chen to debrief the web operation. As we talked through the tactical elements, she mentioned something that surprised me. Manning, I've been meaning to tell you. There's a position opening up in our Denver field office. Senior deputy, supervisory role. Interested? I looked out the window at the city lights of my hometown, thinking about my family sleeping in their beds, probably still processing everything they'd learned about me. For the first time in 12 years, the idea of coming home didn't feel like defeat. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need, but Manning? You've built something impressive with the Marshal Service. Don't let anyone convince you to apologize for that. After we hung up, I sat in a quiet hotel room and thought about the conversation I'd had with Emma earlier that day. She'd asked me why I'd hidden my real life from them, and I'd given her the practical answers: safety, assumptions, protection. But there was a deeper truth I hadn't shared. I'd hidden my success because I'd needed to know I could succeed without their belief in me. I'd needed to prove to myself that my worth wasn't dependent on their approval, their understanding, or their definition of achievement. For 12 years, I'd carried the weight of their disappointment, their pity, their certainty that I was wasting my potential. And somewhere along the way, I'd transformed that weight into strength. Their doubt had made me more determined. Their dismissal had made me more focused. Their assumptions had made me more independent. I'd built a career that mattered, a life that fulfilled me, and an identity I was proud of, all while they waited for me to become someone they could understand. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to hide my success from them, I'd achieved something even more valuable than their approval. I'd learned to approve of myself. 3 days later, Dad was discharged from the hospital. The whole family came to see him home, and for the first time in over a decade, I stayed for the family dinner afterward. It was different this time. They asked real questions about my work, my life in Virginia, my plans for the future. They listened when I answered instead of waiting for their turn to offer advice. Emma told me about a case she was working on, not to impress me, but because she genuinely wanted my perspective on the investigative elements. Nathan asked if I ever got scared during operations, and I told him honestly that fear was part of the job, but that training and preparation managed the risk. My mother wanted to know if I was lonely living so far from family, and I explained that I had a chosen family of colleagues who understood the demands of federal service. It wasn't perfect. 12 years of assumptions don't disappear overnight, but it was real in a way our conversations hadn't been for a long time. As I was getting ready to leave for the airport the next morning, Emma walked me to my rental car. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me, "about needing to prove you could succeed without our approval." I waited. I think maybe I've been living the opposite way. Succeeding to get approval instead of succeeding for myself. She looked uncomfortable with the admission. I'm not sure I even know what would make me proud of my own life, as opposed to what makes other people proud of me. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. "That's a hard question," I said, "but it's worth asking." She hugged me goodbye, and this time it didn't feel like pity or obligation. It felt like the beginning of a real relationship between two women who'd finally learned to see each other clearly. On the plane back to Virginia, I thought about Deputy Chief Chen's offer. A supervisory position in Denver would mean being closer to family, building new professional relationships, taking on greater responsibilities. It would also mean starting over in many ways: new team, new cases, new challenges. But as I considered it, I realized something important. For the first time in my adult life, I could make the decision based purely on what I wanted, not on what would prove something to my family or protect them from the truth about my work. They finally knew who I was. They finally understood what I'd built. Their approval was no longer something I needed to earn, or their disappointment something I needed to carry. I was Deputy U.S. Marshal Kelsey Manning, and I had always been exactly who I was supposed to be. It had just taken my family 12 years to catch up. As the plane climbed into the clear Colorado sky, I smiled and opened my laptop to write my response to Chen's offer. Whatever I decided, it would be my choice, made from strength rather than spite, from confidence rather than fear. And for the first time in 12 years, that felt like freedom.